Hello everyone. Thank you for visiting my presentation. My name is Shinji. I'm a second year PhD student at the Higher Education and Student Affairs program in the University of Iowa. Also, I'm a graduate researcher at the Center for Research on Undergraduate Education. Today, I would like to share my presentation that would high impact practices have high impacts on international students in US research universities. So let me start with backgrounds. So as many of you may know, the number of international students has nearly doubled in the last 10 years. And also United States is the most popular host country. Although both domestic and international students may have some difficulties, such as adjustment to new environments or new people, international students may have additional unique issues, such as language barriers or cultural adjustment. And also, compared to domestic students, international students tend to have little off-campus resources because domestic students may have families within a country or they may have some off-campus communities. However, international students tend to have less. So for international students, on-campus resources is very important. In other words, we have to think how we can support international students on campus to engage in learning contents and community on campus. One of the possibly effective practices to help international students with little on-campus resources are high-impact practices. Those practices are designed to engage college students in teaching and learning processes. Through HIPs, students are expected to interact with faculty members or peers. So those practices might be helpful because, as I said, international students tend to have little on-campus resources. So HIPs may help them to be engaged in on-campus resources more through the interaction with faculty member, peers, or any other people on campus. Although there are many studies which have examined the effect of HAPs, I realized that the most studies tend to focus on domestic students. So according to those results, the effect of HAPs are kind of mixed. However, many studies have found a positive relationship between HAPs and the various learning outcomes such as GPA, cognitive development, and psychological development. And also those studies tend to examine multiple HAPs at one time. Also, the effect of HAPs might be conditional. It means the effect of HAPs varied depending on students' background such as race. On the other hand, the number of studies which examine the effect of HAPs on international students are limited. And also those studies which focus on international students tend to examine a less number of HAPs, like just one or just a few. So based on those literature reviews, I made two research questions. First, to what extent are HAPs associated with learning outcomes of international students? And second, to what extent does the association between HAPs and learning outcomes vary across racial groups? So for this study, I used a dataset of the student experience in the research university called CERU. The CERU dataset collected the information about student backgrounds, college experiences, and outcomes from a number of research-intensive universities. So I used a dataset from 2016 to 2018. So the dataset includes 16 research-intensive universities. Although this dataset didn't focus on only international students, it still includes more than 6,500 international students. So let me explain about the method. As the dependent variables, I chose GPA, sense of belonging, and academic satisfaction. As independent variables, I chose 9 HIPs, first year seminar, learning community, living learning community, writing intensive courses, academic experience with diversity, capstone was thesis, academic service learning, internship, and study abroad. Actually, some of HAPs were excluded. For example, the practice of undergraduate research experience was excluded because the questionnaire items about the experience were different between 2016 and 2017. As a control variables, I chose age, sex, parental education, race, year, which ranges from freshman to senior, in-state status, transfer status, intended degree levels, which ranges from bachelor's degree to the doctoral degrees, English native speakers, length to live in the US, SAT/ACT composite score, and financial concern. As an analytical strategist, first, I use the multiple imputation for missing data. It is because one of the issues of the dataset is a relatively high rate of missing data for ACT/SAT composite scores. However, as we know, scores for those tests should be normally distributed, so multiple imputation may work for that part well. So eventually I imputed the missing values for that variable and other control variables as well. And after imputation, I run the fixed effect model. In this model, institutional level variance were adjusted. And I made two different models for each dependent variable. One is simultaneous model, and the other is conditional model. So in the former model, I explore the possible effect of HAPs for all international students. And in the latter model, I examine how the possible effect of HAPs were different between racial categories. Here, I would explain the result. In the simultaneous models, I did not find a lot of significant findings, except for first year seminar was negatively associated with GPA, living learning community was positively associated with sense of belonging and academic satisfaction. Diverse academic experiences was positively associated with sense of belonging, and service learning was negatively associated with GPA. And actually, living learning community is the only one HAP which was positively associated with multiple learning outcomes. So mostly HAPs and learning outcomes, GPA, sense of belonging, and academic satisfaction were not significantly associated among international students in general. And in the conditional model, no interaction between HAPs and racial categories are significant, except for only one case, which was an interaction between service learning and other racial categories when white was placed as a reference. The conclusion from the finding is that participation in HAPs are not often associated with learning outcomes among international students. Moreover, even when they are positively associated with learning outcomes, the change is relatively small. For example, the living learning community was only one HAP which was positively associated with multiple outcomes, sense of belonging, and academic satisfaction. However, the participation brought a less than 0.1 increase in both outcomes, while the range of both outcomes was 0 to 6. So 0.1 to the range of 6 might be small. Thus, it may mean that international students may not benefit from HAPs. There might be a barrier for international students to engage in learning process through HAPs. For example, when international students participate in academic experience with diversity, which is one of the HAPs, Other unique barriers, such as language or cultural difference, may prevent them from fully participating in the learning process. So in that case, the HAP may not produce the expected learning outcomes because international students are not fully engaged because of the unique issues. So it means staff and faculty members in US higher education must understand that merely offering the opportunity of HAPs to international students is not enough. Rather, it is important to understand what kind of barriers may exist for international students to join learning experiences through any activities, including HAPs. Thus, we have to offer further support for international students and make sure that participation in learning actually happens. So, thank you for listening to my presentation.